In March of 2019, Cyclone Idai made landfall in Mozambique and proceeded to tear through everything in its path, destroying crops, blowing away houses, and knocking out electricity across Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. Margaret's home was one of many that suffered catastrophic damage. The sky was heavy that March evening in 2019, the kind of gray that pressed down on the earth and made the air feel thick with silence. In southern Africa, the winds were already gathering, though Margaret didn't yet know how much they would take from her. She was busy doing what she always did, checking on her small pile of maize, sweeping the dirt floor of her house, and keeping an eye on her 5 grandchildren who played outside under the fading light. At 63, Margaret had already weathered storms life had thrown at her, losing her husband, raising her teenage daughter, and becoming the sole guardian of 5 grandchildren whose parents had either passed away or left. She was a grandmother, a mother, a provider, and the fragile thread that held her entire family together. Her hands, roughened by years of digging in the soil and carrying heavy loads, told a story of her survival. But no matter how strong she was, nothing could prepare her for what was coming. When Cyclone Idai made landfall in Mozambique and pushed inland toward Malawi, it did not arrive with mercy. The winds roared like freight trains, stripping trees of their branches and hurling corrugated tin roofs across villages. The rain fell in walls, blinding and endless, flooding fields where corn had once promised food for the year. Margaret woke to the sound of cracking wood and screaming winds. The roof above her rattled like a loose drum, each gust threatening to lift it into the storm. She gathered her grandchildren close, pressing their small heads against her chest, whispering prayers into the chaos. The walls shook. Then came the sound she would never forget, the deep, groaning snap of bricks giving way. One side of her home collapsed, sending dust and rain spraying into the room. She had lived in that house for 30 years. Now it was nothing but broken walls and shattered memories. When dawn finally broke, the world looked unrecognizable. The yard where maize once dried in the sun was now flooded, the stalks beaten into mud. Chickens had vanished. The air smelled of wet soil, destruction, and fear. Margaret walked barefoot through the wreckage with her grandchildren trailing silently behind her. She was the one they looked to for answers, but inside her chest, her heart felt like it was caving in. Where would they sleep? What would they eat? How could she rebuild when she had nothing but 5 bags of maize and a plot of land that never yielded enough? Around her, neighbors cried over missing family members, lost homes, and destroyed crops. It was a shared tragedy, but grief does not make survival easier. Help came in a way Margaret did not expect. Local organizations, working with international partners like HelpAge International, began reaching out to older people who had lost everything. Unlike other aid that often overlooked the elderly, this assistance recognized that grandparents were often the backbone of families. When Margaret received a small envelope of cash, she held it in her hands with disbelief. It wasn't much by the world's standards, but to her, it was a chance to rebuild what the storm had stolen. She walked to the market, her grandchildren following like a loyal procession, and bought bricks. With each brick laid, she began to rebuild the fallen wall of her home, not just a shelter, but a promise to her family that they still had a future. The money was enough for one wall, but the house needed more. Margaret, refusing to surrender, took out a small loan and began digging river sand to sell to local businesses for cement production. Day after day, under the scorching Malawian sun, she shoveled sand into piles, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. She carried baskets balanced on her head, her frame bending under the weight, while her grandchildren watched their grandmother fight for their survival. Every kwacha she earned went into buying more bricks, patching leaks, and slowly restoring dignity to a home that had been reduced to rubble. She was not just building walls, she was building hope. But survival after cyclone is never simple. Margaret's maize harvest, already small, had been destroyed. That year she managed to collect only 5 bags, barely enough to feed her family for a few months. Each day she measured out small rations, trying to stretch the food as far as it would go. And then came another blow. The government sold the plot of land she had been using for farming. The soil that had given her family food, meager as it was no longer hers. The future became a shadow filled with uncertainty. Margaret looked at her grandchildren, their growing bodies needing more than she could give, and felt the weight of desperation press heavier than the cyclone winds had. Margaret's story is not hers alone. Across Malawi, thousands of grandparents find themselves in the same position, raising children not their own, carrying the weight of households with no pensions, no jobs, and no safety nets. They work until their hands can no longer hold tools, and even then, they keep going because they have no choice. In a country where natural disasters are becoming more frequent and more violent, older people are often the most vulnerable, yet they are also the strongest pillars of their families. They rebuild, they sacrifice, and they keep moving forward, even when every step feels impossible. When you see Margaret today, standing outside her partially rebuilt home, the cracks of loss are still there, but so is her strength. The maize dries once again in the sun. Children's laughter fills the yard, and though she knows her next harvest may not come, she still finds ways to provide. Her life remains precarious, her income uncertain, her body weary. But her eyes carry a light that no cyclone could extinguish, the light of a grandmother who refuses to give up. Margaret's story is not only about survival. It is about resilience, love, and the unshakable bond between a grandmother and the children who depend on her. It is about the power of even the smallest support to change a life. And it is a reminder that behind every statistic about disaster, there's a face, a name, and a fight to keep going.